Welcome to the Red Rose Film Club, a movie podcast that examines the wide world of cinema through a perpetually lefty, pinko commie, soy boy, cuck, Antifa, super soldier filter. But more specifically, we love movies and want to create a podcast that would appeal to the disparate taste of our liberal, leftist, socialist, communist, Marxist, and Leninist friends. Red Rose Film Club is for leftists of all stripes who don't know what to talk about at parties other than movies and politics. My name is Craig. I work in public education and am passionate about social justice and workers' rights. My tastes range, but mostly exist on opposite ends of the highbrow, lowbrow spectrum. And I'm with...
Hey, I'm Hal. I use she, they pronouns. I work in higher ed and run a food pantry. I care about food access, reproductive justice, building a robust social welfare state, and ending the state's domination through the criminal legal system. I'm a staunch defender of fucking dropping parallelism when it doesn't suit the circumstances, because oh boy, is it hard to staunchly defend anything even in the neighborhood of this movie. Wolf. So Craig, what other pop culture are you getting into these days?
I have been woefully behind on most everything pop culture wise and haven't been watching or doing much. I've just been really busy lately. But I did realize, and what I did watch kind of sucked. Which is why I mentioned those Frankenstein movies.
Oh, okay. It's like,
but I realized before that, I watched something that we did not talk about, which is I watched You Cannot Kill David Arquette for the first time.
Hell
it was awesome.
It's good.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting David Arquette to be as charming and like, I guess, affable and likable.
He's a sweet, goofy guy. I mean, he's kind of like Dewey.
Right. Yeah. He is a lot
his
like
character
Dewey.
from the Scream movies, if you're not familiar, listener.
Yeah, it was... I did not know the whole, like, reason he did that. I just thought he was, like, a weird dude that was like, yeah, wrestling's my thing now.
I mean, he is a mark, right? Like, he loves loves wrestling.
Which I didn't know that either. Like, right. I just thought that it was like a weird, eccentric Hollywood guy thing to be like, well, I'm a wrestler now. And for those that don't know, like, David Arquette made a movie in the early 2000s called Ready to Rumble. I never saw that. Did you ever see it?
No. Mike and... after we watched You Cannot Kill David Arquette, Mike was like, we should watch this because as a teen, as an early tween or whatever, he liked it. And I fell asleep.
Okay. So. Well, by all accounts, it's not very good from what I remember.
No, I think it came out in like 2000.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So it's a like wrestling comedy, but as a part of promotion for that, it was during the times where like WCW was kind of flailing and on its way out and desperate for ratings, and so they brought him and who was the other guy? I want to say Scott Conn, but that doesn't seem right. It's a Scott Conn type. Brought them on to WCW as like wrestlers to like promote it, and then it ended up that WCW wrote in that David Arquette won the WCW championship, which rubbed a lot of fans the wrong way, and it rubbed a lot of wrestlers the wrong way. Do we have it?
It was Scott Conn.
Oh, it was Scott Conn. Holy shit.
Bravo.
Boom.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that's important for non-wrestling fans to know contextually for this is that this is still the era where, like, kayfabe had not died. I mean, kayfabe still exists in some form, but there's not generally the expectation, even though internal to the media landscape of wrestling, they pretend as if kayfabe is in effect. It used to be that, if you were a heel and you were fighting with someone, you wouldn't be seen talking to them outside of the arena, right? Like the kayfabe was totalizing. It was supposed to impact every area of your life. And you were supposed to maintain the fiction at all times. And this was a period where that was like starting to fragment with, the internet becoming more dominant in people's lives. But it was very... wrestlers were upset because you're supposed to earn your dues.
Yeah.
And fans were upset because it was a total dismissal of kayfabe.
Right, yeah. And that, like, David Arquette's reputation was still kind of like the pretty boy, like, young hotshot actor. And I think it was just, like...
Yeah, like he didn't wait in line.
Yeah, he was just like a Hollywood A-lister. I mean, he wasn't, but, like, in the eyes of wrestling fans that just, like, waltzed in and kind of, like... got this thing that so many of them like have respect for and dedication towards. It took years and all that, and it fucked him up for like years. He felt terrible about that, like his place in wrestling, and a lot of like he felt bad. I don't think as much for the fans, but for like the other wrestlers who I think he got they felt like rightfully like, well, I've been working for this all my life, and David Arquette came in for like a night and wins the championship or whatever. So this movie is a documentary about like 20 years later, he decides to kind of earn the respect of the wrestling community by doing some of the most wild, fucked up wrestling matches of any career, in which one of them he gets his throat slit, basically.
Yeah,
not basically, he does.
He does.
Yeah.
And it's accidental. It's not
kind of. I mean, that guy was an asshole.
Nick Gage is not
Gage.
An asshole.
Oh, he's not?
No. So this is also the thing is like, I watch independent wrestling, I was familiar with this happening like as it occurred. Watching the documentary was an interesting illumination of the David Arquette of it all.
See, I only know that guy from this.
No, he is a. I mean, he's a fucking hardcore wrestler.
Yeah.
He only does hardcore matches basically, or that's what he's most known for. But he's not an asshole. I mean, he's a dude that. Nick Gage has a really interesting life story in that like he wrestled with drug addiction and like robbed a bank and went to prison and served his time and came out and has been sober since and became a hardcore wrestler. And is generally like very well liked on the independent scene. The issue is that like David Arquette was not appropriately prepared for the level of hardcore wrestling. Because what happened is he took a light tube to the neck, and the reason why hardcore wrestlers use light tubes is because when you hit someone with them like on their back, usually they shatter into 1,000 pieces, and the shards of glass aren't big enough to like hurt you on the ground.
They'll do like little cuts or whatever, but not.
Yes, but they like pulverize essentially.
Yeah.
And what happened is he took it after it had been cut, after it had been hit, the shattered part to the neck. So it was like a mistake.
Yeah.
But I will defend Nick Gage.
I only know him from this.
Yeah. He's good. He primarily wrestles with GCW, Game Changer Wrestling.
Okay.
In the northeastern United States. There's actually a really funny bit where he came on AEW and wrestled Chris Jericho as part of Chris Jericho's battles against MJF, where he had to do like a certain number of trials before he could wrestle MJF directly, kind of like the Herculean trials. And he wrestled Nick Gage in a hardcore match, and Nick Gage, one of the things that he's known for doing is like taking a pizza cutter and like running it across the front of people's heads,
which he also did to David Arquette, I believe.
Yes. And usually what you do is it's worked, right? Or like gimmicked, where you like kind of put your hand or there's like a stop on it, and so he's not actually like running against the dude's forehead. But in this match against Chris Jericho, he is doing it to his forehead.
Jesus.
And there's a planned ad break, and who is the ad but
David Arquette?
Domino's Pizza.
That's funny.
So I recommend
was that on
watching
purpose?
that clip. No, and in fact, Domino's was mad about it. But yeah, that's a little background on Nick Gage. But I think so what was your kind of big takeaway from You Cannot Kill David Arquette? Like having watched it, not having maybe been exposed to some parts of that independent scene and his history.
Mostly it was just how much I like David Arquette now. Like, I mean, like, not that I dislike David Arquette. He just wasn't somebody who was on my like radar as a human being, if that makes sense. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I knew him as an actor.
You were not a fan or unfan.
Yeah. I just knew him. I mean, I was a fan. I obviously like the Scream movies and like a few things here and there, but I just didn't know much about him other than like David Arquette, part of the kooky Arquette family or whatever. But yeah, I like him a lot now.
Right?
He's like
I think he's very sympathetic coming out of it. And I think they're, kind of extrapolating outwards or like synthesizing outside of David Arquette specifically. I think it's an interesting story or a reinscription of a very classic story, which is like the way fame like affects people, right? A classic, A Star Is Born kind of moment of the trajectory of rise and fall of fame. But there's like a unique pathos to his story specifically because he came from a carny family,
right? And I was gonna say that I feel like that his kind of like it kind of applies to all the Arquette siblings that are like kind of fighting for legitimacy and despite having come up as kind of notable kooks in Hollywood, I guess, because they are a carny family and they do have like
they're nepo babies, but they're not nepo babies,
right? Yeah.
Because coming from a carny family is like not altogether
it's like the bottom rung of the
benefit.
nepo ladder,
right? I know I've talked about loving Alexis Arquette before, R.I.P. But yeah, I think it's just like it's a very interesting kind of spin on that classic fall, rise and fall of fame story. And obviously as wrestling fans, it has that added hook of what does it look like when a fan essentially tries to insert themselves into kayfabe, and the ways that can go poorly. But then also there is that kind of like redemption moment, and
it's like,
and he's a real fan. Like he is not,
for sure. Like you can tell he's not saying it for the movie or the cameras or whatever. Like he feels bad that like he has left a stain on, like, as he sees it, on the legacy of wrestling.
When he trains, like he's not. He learns how to take bumps and stuff. He does
well, that's the best part
about
is when the first hardcore match he does, which is like literally 7 dudes in a backyard just beating the shit out of each other. And this is before like he trained, so he shows up and he's like flabby and out of breath and can't keep up, and just straight getting his ass kicked by like hillbillies in like a backyard, which was awesome. That was really cool. But yeah, so that was cool. And then the other things I want to talk about are just 2 things I'm excited for. One is coming very soon, and one is not coming very soon, but was just announced. The first one is Lil Wayne and 2 Chainz are dropping a collab album next week. And I've like recently got into 2 Chainz. Like I've always been aware and enjoyed him on like guesting on certain verses, but didn't really do a deep dive into his discography until recently. And I'm a fan, so this is the first like 2 Chainz project that's come out since I've kind of done my little deep dive. And I was like, like everybody in the late 2000s, I was a Lil Wayne fan. He's kind of, for me at least, I know there's a lot of defenders or whatever, but he's fallen off a little bit. But I'm excited for this one. Thoughts? Are you excited?
I do look forward to it. I love 2 Chainz.
Yeah.
I like much of his music. I would consider his song with Pharrell Feds Watchin' to be like one of my favorite songs of all time. Like it's definitely top 50 and it's probably top 20, honestly. So, they call him 2 Chainz, but he got him a few on, and I'm excited to hear what he's got on this new record.
Hell yeah. And then the other thing I'm excited for is they just announced that Terrifier 3 comes out next year. Hell yeah. Big fan of the Terrifier movies, which is going to come back up because of the movie we're going to talk about.
That moment, gore does not like make me sick, but the context of it and like the viciousness of the way he conceptualized indigenous people producing that, I was like, ugh!
Yeah.
Okay.
It is it's weirdly a lot more palatable in Terrifier.
Yes,
the thing we're going to talk about. But have you seen both of or actually all 3 of the Terrifier movies so far?
I have seen Terrifier.
Terrifier, okay.
Yeah.
So Terrifier is actually the second movie with Art the Clown.
Okay,
There was a anthology movie called All Hallows Eve, where he plays where Art the Clown is kind of the standout of the 3 stories in that, where he's like trying to break into a girl's house. It has clearly not been like fully conceptualized the way it is in Terrifier 1 and 2, where it was just like
he's not a fully realized character.
Yeah. Well, which I mean is weird to say about him in 1 and 2, but like 1 and 2 has a clear mission statement of like, you're gonna watch this gross fucked up dude do gross fucked up stuff for a while, and then this one he was just like, well, what if I just like I thought of a gross fucked up guy and like let's toss him into a story. And but also Terrifier 3 is set during Christmas.
Hell yeah.
Which I'm very excited about.
I love a fucking holiday slasher.
Me too.
It is. Have you ever seen Blood Rage? This is not really
Blood Rage?
Yes, it is.
That sounds familiar.
So there's a couple reasons I like it. 1, it is a Thanksgiving themed slasher. 2, it was filmed in Jacksonville, Florida.
Oh, hell yeah.
I know Kevin has it at Cap City because that's how Jesse and I originally watched it. Is we rented the DVD when we were like, we need we were watching through some holiday slashers, and Kevin recommended it. But it is fun. It includes like like the opening scene where it's like setting the stage that this guy is crazy.
Yeah.
He's like in an insane asylum, and someone hands him a slice of pumpkin pie, and he just squishes it in his hand, and there's like a slow motion zoom in on a hand squishing a piece of pumpkin pie.
That.
And I was like, I I'm in. Yes.
So are you excited for in a few weeks?
Yes, I am.
Eli Roth's Thanksgiving.
I am. I've already tried to start recruiting people to go see it.
Yeah,
but
I'm excited too.
It's
against my
bummer.
better judgment.
People keep trying to plan like Friendsgiving events, and I'm like, okay, that's fine, but could we go watch Thanksgiving, please?
I always get excited for a Eli Roth movie for some reason, and they're usually not great.
I have some abiding affection for him.
Me too.
That
It's
I
weird.
Can't quite explain. I think it's probably like relates to my high school years of really loving Tarantino and just kind of like the interplay there,
the grindhouse of it, like
yeah. And he also on at least one occasion, and I think more than one, has been on God, I can't believe I'm saying this. I might have said this on air before, but I don't listen to it every time because I don't listen to his psychotic guests, but I do listen to Chris Jericho's podcast, Talk is Jericho.
Yeah.
And he has a lot of friends or connections in horror. So like Joe Bob Briggs comes on around around Halloween usually.
Time.
And last year, the year before, Eli Roth came on to talk about like his favorite horror movies. And I like listening to him talk. I like people that care about film and are invested in it, the art of it, even if maybe the art of it is not exactly what I conceive of as art.
Yeah. Or sometimes goes horribly awry, like when he did that Death Wish remake with Bruce Willis, which was boy. That was a mess.
So, and also I'm curious because this will be the first horror movie he's made. I mean, he's been making this for a fucking hot minute. It kept getting delayed, but I'm excited to see what him returning to horror after making a children's movie looks like.
Yeah. What was that movie?
The House with the Clock on the Walls.
Yeah.
Jack Black vehicle.
Yep.
What I mean, I did not see it because I don't watch children's movies. But from what I heard, it was a solid
I didn't see it either,
children's movie. So I look forward to seeing it, and it's been a hot minute since I've seen a slasher in theaters that wasn't connected to Halloween,
right? Or
Scream.
A pre-existing thing. Yeah. Well, I guess this technically is pre-existing, but he's
but in a series, part of a long-standing property.
Like, so it's from the Grindhouse, like fake commercials or whatever, and it seems like this is not really going along with the Grindhouse trailer. I don't remember the Grindhouse trailer that well, but I don't remember it being a slasher. Do you remember? I don't remember what it was. I just remember a man stuffed like a turkey on the table in the Grindhouse trailer.
Yeah, I think this is being done just much more in the style of like a classic slasher. Which that's
mask
great.
and knife and like
I love. They're dressed like pilgrims. Great. Let's do it.
What about you? What have you been getting into lately?
Well, no spoilies because these are two relatively new releases, but in the last since we recorded last episode, I have seen Killers of the Flower Moon and Dix the Musical in theaters. Killers of the Flower Moon, I feel like there's not much to be said that has not been litigated extensively on the internet, but I would just say like Scorsese is still at the top of his game, and Lily Gladstone's performance is heartrending, and the fact that it has generated so much conversation around the Osage people, the legacy of the Osage terror that they experienced, expropriation of wealth and land from Native people, who has ownership over story. Like, these are all hallmarks of good fucking art.
Yeah.
So I would say watch it.
Hell yeah. I was gonna go see it this week. This was like a weird one. Like, every once in a while a movie will come out that my mom will be like, I want to see that with you. And this was one of them, which is normally like not her type of movie that she wants to see with me. But it's also 3.5 hours long.
Yeah, it's very long.
My mom keeps going like, well, what about 8 o'clock tonight? And I was like, no, I have work in the morning, and I'm going to get home it's going to end at midnight. I don't want to do that.
Literally made Mike like meet me at the movie theater. We saw it the day, that Thursday that dropped. I think that was the 19th. I was like, the screen was at 6:15. I was like, Mike, meet me. We have to meet at the theater immediately after work and go see it, because absolutely not. I cannot be watching something at 11.
Long enough, but too long if you're trying to fit it into an after normal working schedule.
Yes, exactly. And Dix the Musical, I saw the trailer, did not have any interest in seeing it, even though I love musicals and also silly things. But then I heard Aaron Jackson and Sharp. I can't remember the other guys. Josh Sharp. Thank you. On Keep It, which is a pop culture podcast I really like with Aaron Madison the Third and Louis Vuittel.
Is that yeah, that's one of the. What the fuck are those guys?
I remember
the Obama writers.
No, well, it is on the Crooked. Yes,
Crooked. That's
it's on the Crooked Crooked Media Network, but they are not. They are
separate. Yes. Yeah. I can't ever remember what this shit's called.
Love it. Yeah.
I've listened to that. I like those two guys.
I like them a lot. And the two creators and stars of Dixie Musical, Aaron Jackson and Josh Sharp, were on their show last week or the week before, and they were talking about their movie, and they were like, we're so happy. First of all, I learned that they were gay, which I did not immediately pick up from. Maybe that's on me.
Are they in it too?
They star in it.
Oh, okay,
yes.
Okay.
I was not familiar with their work or their game ahead of time. And so I learned that they were gay, and I was like, okay, that makes me more interested. And then in this podcast interview on Keep It, they said, we're so glad that movies like Love, Simon, are getting made, but like whatever happened to like the legacy of John Waters and gay filth? And I was like, all right, okay. I will go see this. So I dragged Mike to go see it, and it is not even. It's not consistent. I frankly did not think Megan Mullally was very good in it. I really did not like her role. It didn't make me laugh. But when I did laugh, I was like choking on soda, can't breathe. So I don't know that it's worth seeing in theaters if you aren't someone that has like A-list or some equivalent. But it's absolutely worth like drinking some wine and watching it
has an
on
interesting
your couch.
Cast too. Megan Thee Stallion is in it.
Yes, she plays their boss.
Okay.
And she does have like a song that is basically all hers.
Yeah.
And she's not in it a lot.
Yeah.
There's like a couple of scenes.
Well, the one I'm seeing now that I'm very interested in seeing this person in is Tom Kenny is apparently in it as a character named Backpack. Do you know Tom Kenny?
I do not.
He's a voice actor, like been in the industry for years, but most famous at this point for being the voice of SpongeBob. Yeah. He's like I have like I'm sure I said that like it was a weird thing, but a fascination with voice actors. Just like listening to them talk about their craft is really interesting to me. And like interviews with Tom Kenny are always really interesting, like how he goes about like figuring out a voice and things like that. But like literally, if you look up Tom Kenny, he's been in he has 576 acting credits on IMDb because he's been like a voice guy for 30 years now.
It is when the joke lands, it's quite funny.
But when it doesn't.
It's and when it doesn't, it's because, and I'm right on the podcast, they talk about how they did this as a live stage show.
Oh, that's interesting.
For a period, like basically for several years until it was starting to get picked up as a movie, and then they discontinued it. And it rose out of like an improv comedy group, and there are just parts of it that just feel that way. Like they were like, someone said this and it's funny once. One person laughed, so now it's in there forever.
You need to workshop that a little bit more.
And it just kind of has an improv comedy vibe to it. But there are bits that are very just really gross, over the top, hit it home. So it's a drink a little with friends and watch movie. And then I will skip over this. But then I did want to say last night, a friend and I watched a double feature of Cry Baby, John Waters' 1990 musical.
Not seen that in probably, I remember nothing.
Yeah.
So it would be a new watch to me. I think literally probably maybe 12 or 13
it was
I saw it.
Functionally a new watch to me.
Yeah.
I think I had seen it like we were talking a little bit before, like maybe somewhere between 16 and 18, definitely while I was in high school. Not since then.
It's the Johnny Depp of it that keeps me from going back, which I know he's good in this.
He's good in it. He's also young enough that he functionally is a different person to me. Like I'm not looking at him being constantly reminded of this
and it was before his era of like
man.
Wig and makeup acting, which he's been in for like 20 years.
He really does. I mean, not to spend too much time gassing him up, but he delivers a lovely performance. I don't know why I haven't revisited it. I love movies about greasers. Like that is
hell yeah.
That's a distinct.
That's the whole
that's a distinct subgenre of film I like. And so that was lovely. And then we watched a DVD that Craig lent me.
Live on pod last time.
Yes, live on pod. So good follow through. We watched Shadow of the Vampire. So it was one of the movies that Craig listed as his favorite vampire flicks. And then while I was logging this on Letterboxd,
we like it.
Yes,
yeah.
I did like it.
Hell yeah.
I thought it was quite funny. And I love a movie about movies.
Me
know,
too. Yeah.
where they talk about filmmaking craft. And Malkovich, I thought was like surprisingly and uncharacteristically restrained.
Yeah, he's very subdued in this. He's the like straight guy to Willem Dafoe being the weirdo.
Just constantly, every time he walked on screen, I'm just like peals of giggles. You know?
Oh my god, you can't have them both be weird in the same movie. That would be too much to handle. Those two guys going full like 100% weirdo mode would be just.
It would be too much too much. So I go to log this in Letterboxd, and I'm like, what else has this guy directed? E. Elias Merhing. Okay?
Oh, that sounds really. That last name sounds
so.
Familiar. Is he related to somebody?
I don't know if he's related to someone, but what he did direct is Begotten.
Begotten? Do I know?
Are you familiar with this at all?
Oh, is that like
the
horror
very
movie
weird,
that,
fucked up horror movie that is essentially a silent movie?
I've never seen it, but I know of it as like top 10 weird fucked up horror movies.
Well, that's the thing is, so when I looked it up, there was definitely a period of time, part of my love for movies, right, as it was being cultivated kind of independently away from like what my parents or family wanted to watch, was, you know, going on like Usenet forums or like very early days of IMDb forums and being like, what's the most fucked up movie you can find? Or being in LiveJournal and being like, I want to look at, I want to watch the edge of cinema, and I'm like trying to torrent stuff or like find. And
that was me in high school watching High Tension.
Yes, yeah, love it. Yes, French extremity surging at that time was very. It synchronized
Martyrs
well.
Too.
Yes, but that was like always one of the ones that came up. And then I had a friend who was on a similar journey, and also like loves art, and was like, somebody told me about this, and we watched it more than one time.
Begotten, you mean?
Yes. Yeah. And it is
weird and fucked up.
Genuinely freaky, haunting, disturbing. And so when I opened it up, I'm like, oh, this guy has made very few other things, but the number 2 thing that people know him for is Begotten. I was like, actually, this makes perfect fucking sense, because it's essentially him making his own like German expressionistic
which is then
silent movie. And actually it was kind of wonderful to have it situated in that context, but it was a real like gag goop shocked moment for me,
that's
because
wild.
It really like,
how many years would it apart with it? Probably like 10 years maybe?
About 10. So I've seen dates that range from like 1989 to 1991 for Begotten.
Just because it was like so small and independent.
Or it's like
and just...
when I looked elsewhere, it said 1989, and then like on Letterboxd it was saying like 1991 or some other place I looked. So so if we say 10 years, because
he showed it to some friends in 89, but it didn't get any sort of real release until like 91 or whatever.
Right, so, or it's like a student film. I'm not quite sure about the context of its creation, but it was kind of a jump scare on the level of, I haven't thought about this movie in a while, and it's interesting to resituate him in the context of film. Also lovely to think about this as his effort to make his own iteration of what silent film specifically can do in the realm of horror that dialogue film cannot do. And then he got to make this, so thank you very much for letting me borrow it. It was delightful.
That's always a tough call when you lend somebody a movie and be like, I love this movie. Report back, please. I don't want to put pressure on people to be like, it was pretty good. It's pretty good. So I was coming in to see if you're going to give me a cursory. It's pretty good.
I love, I like vampire flicks. So baseline, it was coming in strong, and it's weird, and it's a picture about pictures. So I loved it.
That's why I keep going back to that movie that's not very good, but the one about the making of The Room. I do love movies about the making of movies, and that one has enough like funny moments of, and I like The Room, that like even though I'm like, well, James Franco's kind of a creep, and that movie's not that good, like just structurally, but there are parts that I like about it.
Yeah, like
preview for our upcoming conversation about Bone Tomahawk.
Like to be in the backstage, you know.
Okay, cool. Well, let's move on to our current events. Hal, what's going on in the world that's either got you celebrating or living in despair?
So just kind of continuing the theme of the last couple of episodes, touching a little bit on Israel-Palestine. I don't think it does the like horrible violation justice first to like try and do a deep dive on something that's not connected to the like overarching things that we're talking about. Like it deserves its own space, and that's something that I do want us to explore. There are a couple of entities that have been putting out Palestinian film for free online, like hosting free screenings online and stuff, and I think that it would be great for us to dig into something like that and really give space and full time that it's due. But something that I want to say is that something I have been wrestling with a lot this year, I would say the last year and a half, and really since I was arrested fall 2020, but especially the last year and a half, is like retaining some basis of hope to motivate political action has been hard, and something that I think is really beautiful about the last week specifically as it relates to this situation is how many people have been mobilizing, but also that we've seen more politicians, including like AOC and other members of the squad, speak up for a ceasefire. And this is not to like unduly praise them. I'm not saying like, oh my God, you're such amazing people, but rather just like, even 5 years ago, that's like unthinkable in terms of the political environment of the United States. And what it says to me is that people mobilizing is making an impact, is that it's shifting the Overton window, that it's reconceptualizing what's possible to call for politically. And that is really encouraging and heartening to me.
And I feel like the frequent right-wing tactic of equating Zionism with Judaism and like daring you to criticize it or else you're like an anti-Semite, I think has not worked as well as it has in years past. I think that that is kind of people are finally starting to kind of see through that tactic of like, which is also hopeful. Not to say that they're not doing it, it just doesn't seem like it is as fruitful a plan of attack for them this time, which I think signals a sea change as well.
Yeah, I agree. So how about you, Craig?
Oh my God, I'm excited. and I'm going to apologize, but I think you might already know this guy, but I think I'm going to introduce you to a new right-wing ding-dong.
Oh, Lord.
Who had a funny moment this week.
Okay, let me make some space in my rogues gallery.
So do you know, first off, this is going to be a two-parter, because the thing that he did was very brief and funny, but I do want to see if you know this guy, and I do want to talk about him a bit, because he is really funny. But do you know who Patrick Bet David is?
I don't on the name, and I just looked up his picture, and I don't recognize his face.
Okay, so this
I'm
guy,
in the blackout zone.
He has a very interesting story that he then used to basically become a con man. But he fled Iran and the revolution as like a kid and came to America. Like that's the interesting part of his backstory. Now, what he's done with that is he paints this picture of like, I was a refugee in a time of war, and I built myself up, which is all true, except he built himself up through a series of scams and like grind set mindset bullshit.
So classic American dream shit.
Yeah. But what my favorite part about him is he has a knack for naming his scammy businesses the dumbest shit you've ever heard. So the thing that like he got rich from is he started an MLM called PHP, People Helping People, which was just a straight up MLM scam that he got rich for and took a lot of shit for. But I do love that it's called People Helping People. And that's how he got rich. So now he has moved into the like right-wing griftosphere.
Of course, that's what you do. You slowly stake out your claim.
But he has a very interesting space in it where like he pays lip service to like centrism. But only the lip service, and like centrism in the most like basic of ways, where it's just like, well, I need to appear like I'm a centrist, which is the thing that he did this week that was really funny. But I think, okay, so the name of his YouTube channel is Valuetainment, and they shoot his episodes in a set that is made to look like the inside of a bank vault. So they're all sitting in front of like lock boxes and shit. And okay, so this should give you a good idea of this guy. There's a hilarious video of him, like, I don't know what the fuck this is on YouTube, but like he's doing a cribs of his house, and he takes them to his study. He goes, "This is where I come when I just need to think." And I commissioned this painting, and I'm gonna put it on the screen for you.
Oh my god!
So he has in his home a painting that he is at the center of, and in this painting, it's him and all. Is
that a NASCAR driver to the right of him?
A Senna, like Formula One driver. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's him in a room with all the great thinkers of the world. So it's him and Tupac, Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy, Einstein. I don't know who the fuck that is.
Is that like Kissinger?
It looks like Kissinger, but I can't quite tell. Martin Luther King Jr. And I don't know who that one is. Oh, it's the Shah of Iran.
Yeah.
And on the table, you can't see it, but like to hear him talk about it is funny. He says, and we're all discussing two rival philosophies. So on the table, we have the Communist Manifesto and Atlas Shrugged. And this is all in a painting that he commissioned to be in his self-described thinking room. This guy is awesome. Like, he is so funny. Just a complete grifting moron that, like, most of his show is, like, complaining about trans people and, like, fairness in women's sports at this point. But the really funny thing he did this week was he had Ron DeSantis on and asked him point blank, like, do you put hidden heels in your shoes?
Okay, I
and
do
it
know
a very funny moment.
Yes, I do know of this situation, not because I knew this guy, but because I tweeted about this, because Ron DeSantis' response was, "This is no time for foot fetishism," which I must respond, nay, sir, it's always time for foot fetishism.
100%. But yeah, that's the like kind of centrism he will play, is like, not like be like, hey, it's kind of fucked up that you did X, Y, or Z. He's new
goofing both sides. Yeah.
Not that like, it kind of messed up that you did X, Y, or Z. But like, are you wearing high heels? That's his form of centrism. He also did an interview with Alex Jones at one point where he basically was like, you're a firebrand. But he, like, his centrism was like, do you think you went a little too far with the Sandy Hook thing? So, like, that's kind of his, like...
daring to acknowledge that harassing the parents of dead children.
Yeah, simply acknowledging, like, a fucked up thing that someone did is being a, like, moderate centrist to him.
I mean...
And he has...
There's maybe reason to believe that simply acknowledging reality does make you... does pull you in a different direction.
I would also... most of his episodes are just straight hot shit garbage. Like, he just has, it's basically like all of Joe Rogan's guests just cycle through, like their studios have to be next door, like they finish Joe Rogan and then come to him. But they did one episode where he had Sam Cedar on, and that was great. I mean, because Sam Cedar's great. So
were they fighting?
No, because like this guy's so dumb that Sam Cedar's ideas are so radical to him that he just kind of is like laughing.
Can't directly engage.
Like Sam Cedar, the thing that starts their big argument is Sam Cedar is like, if I were president, it would be illegal to be a billionaire. And he's like, and they're like laughing. Like he has like a whole. On his podcast, he has like a whole crew of like doofuses that are on the show with him that are just like goofy dudes in suits with like really manicured beards that are just like grinding. We're grinding.
It sounds like he inadvertently is doing the Adam Friedland show for real.
Oh, that's a great way of saying it. Yes, that is what he's doing. He is like, yeah.
Also, you showing me this painting means it's something I've been meaning to do for a while. I'll have to figure out. I think we could probably do it for one of the Zahler movies, maybe the last one, but I really want to do a write-up on like conservative theories of art.
Oh yeah,
like because there's just something that, you know, I think we need to dig into the ways in which those Enlightenment era ideals are perverted through the mirror of the 21st century conservative.
This painting of his is a great example.
Yes.
And also,
I was thinking about that painting from the dude that was accused of
the Clarence Thomas guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And all that guy's statues. You know, there's just
his,
like
goddamn.
The tackiness is tied to ideology, and I need to explicate. So,
but hell yeah.
That said,
okay, we buried the lead.
Dun 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 dun. Hey, listener, this is our 1-year anniversary episode.
Hell yeah.
Wow.
I think our first episode got published on November 7th.
Yeah, so
we're right there.
We're very, very close.
I know. That's I'm proud.
Me too.
Because sometimes commitment is not my strong suit. And so yeah, getting through something for 1 year is a big step for me. So yeah.
I'm me too.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm proud of us for making this far and sticking to it, and I'm also proud of us for like learning and growing and kind of evolving and figuring out like exactly kind of what perspective we want to be speaking from, and sorting that out. Also, I think it stopped me from talking at people about movies as much in my non-pod life, like having that good like ventilation. You know, you're
not just pin up like I saw goddamn Victor Frankenstein. I gotta yell at somebody about it.
Someone needs to hear about this. You know, so we have a couple of like first anniversary pod celebration prompts that we're gonna walk through. So Craig, our first one is, what are your top 3 favorite movies that we watched?
Do we want to go?
Sure.
Back and forth. Okay, so my number 3 takes the spot because it's probably my favorite movie, like growing up as a teenager, like one of the movies I watched again and again as I was like becoming a movie fan, which was Dog Day Afternoon. Love Dog Day Afternoon, love Al Pacino in that movie. I like Sidney Lumet just in general. And I really liked our discussion around Dog Day Afternoon, even though I think that's one of the movies that we disagreed on. I mean, I think you still liked it. You just didn't like it as much as I did. But I just love Dog Day Afternoon.
Yeah.
What about you? What's your third favorite movie that we've done on this podcast?
Mine is One Sings, the Other Doesn't. The Agnes Varda film that we watched with our lovely guest from Battleship Pretension, David.
Yep.
It was, I think, my favorite first watch that I've had because of the pod. Like I had not seen it before.
I don't know if I ever realized that.
Yeah,
that
I had not seen it. I had seen other Varda. But
right, I knew you had seen a lot because that's the only one I've seen.
Yeah, I had not seen this. I think I was put off a little. Sometimes when someone who doesn't usually direct musicals, something is listed as being a musical, I'm like, I love musicals, but I want to venture down that road? And of course I should have. It's about abortion. It's Agnes Varda. It's amazing. But I really liked that, and I loved having good conversation with David. I enjoyed that episode a lot.
Yeah, hell yeah.
How about your second?
Well, my number 2 is probably the episode that I would say don't go back and listen to.
The audio.
Yeah, because it was our very first episode before I knew how to work these microphones, and long story short, had them all scrambled up on the wrong channel, so we sound like robots and whatnot. But my number 2 favorite film of the movies we watched is Parasite. Loved the movie. Loved our conversation, even though if a lot of it is lost to the sands of terrible technology. Yeah, learning. That's another good reason I like it, is it represents how I learned how to use a microphone and a mixer over this year and whatnot. But yeah, love Parasite. What about you? What's your number 2?
My second, I'm listing Bamako. Even though I said that was also a first time watch for me, so even though I said the third one was my favorite, Bamako, I think both the combination of the movie and the episode are really my second favorite of the, I think, 23 we've done prior to this episode. And that's because I loved the kind of magical realist qualities of it. I thought that it was really super effective at capturing high level macro ideas in a empathetic, direct way. And I'm really proud of the write-up. I've had like a couple of people, both that I know and also that I don't know, reach out and say that they felt like they learned something about structural adjustment programs or that they didn't know
count me in that
about
group.
How like international financing works. And so I'm proud of that, and I think the movie is beautiful. And if you haven't watched it, again, you can watch it on Canopy, which you should be able to access through your public library, or if you're associated with a college or university. And I highly, highly recommend it. So, what is your number one?
My number one, and I did put some thought into it because I realized I said this when we recorded the episode that it was probably my favorite of all the movies we've watched, even reflecting on it, I would say it still remains my favorite, which is Candyman. And I think Candyman also goes against the point you were talking about conservative art, in that conservative art seems to be all about like owning the competition first. Like, I'm going to make a statement that's going to be incendiary or whatever, and the art comes secondary. Whereas Candyman, I feel like the art is first and foremost, but it's just so well formed and together that the message is so powerful and strong that I just love. And I mean, I'm just a horror freak anyway, so like Candyman had a nice head start for me in this category. Candyman's dope.
Definitely also one of the most visually impactful movies
I watched, for sure.
In terms of like the actual film itself, right?
Yeah. Goddamn, like I love her crawling through the mural of his open mouth is always a banger of an image for me. I love that. And what about you? What is your number one?
Kind of like your number two. I think the audio for our episode for my number one. But this is the movie I'm about to say has been one of my favorite movies since the very first time I saw it, probably like 15 years ago. And that is Spike Lee's Bamboozled.
Yeah.
When satire is done well, I think it can be the pinnacle of cinema. And Bamboozled to me is just like eviscerates racist media while having a solid emotional core.
Yeah, the target is like so recognizable and so like immediately I know why we're making fun of this.
Right, and Spike Lee is talking his shit. Like, he knows every fucking note to hit because this is something that has directly impacted him. And it's like it calls on history to make arguments, but it's very situated specifically in the time that it's from. Again, great performances. Bamboozled. Spike Lee deserves all the flowers.
Oh yeah.
And I'll say the last thing is They Lived for me is like just out of top 3. It's close. It's fighting.
That was a tough one for me too. Yeah.
Because it's also hard because it's like, what are the movies that I would just like rewatch time and time again are not always like. I watch The Departed all the time.
Yeah.
I would not say The Departed is like my favorite movie.
Yeah, but Bamako might be your favorite, but you're probably not going to throw that on for an easy afternoon or whatever. Right.
So just like it depends what itch it scratches.
Hell yeah.
You know. All right. So, Craig.
Yes.
Next, I'd kind of like to talk about something that we've learned from each other. So something we've learned from our co-host. So I will go first. I think there's like a couple of things. I really appreciate that we each bring kind of different knowledge bases, even though we have some overlapping like shared history or some things about our past are growing up or whatever. We both have the experience of growing up in a conservative church, for example. I think we do have different knowledge bases that complement each other well. And I have learned a lot about like contemporary labor organizing from you. And also, I've learned about a lot of movies that I've really come to love and enjoy from you. And I think you have a real like, I hope this is interpreted as a compliment in the way I mean it, golden retriever spirit.
Oh my God, you're not the first person.
that I love and embrace, because I can be kind of a bitter bitch. And
actually, Thomas Green, former guest Thomas Green, was one of the first
on
people
the American
to like
Sniper episode
tell me, you got kind of a golden retriever vibe.
I'm just like happy, ready to jump in, and sometimes I can be a little withholding and bitter. So I appreciate your like optimism and open-heartedness.
Aww.
And I will say something that I have learned a lot from you about, but I resent you for it, is about conservative ding-dongs.
That is honestly what I thought you were going to lead with. So I was glad that came in at the end. But yeah, we love him. We know him. We love him. Add Patrick Bet David to the roster.
Boo.
But yeah, I'll say mine, which is gonna make me feel a little vulnerable. But I've always been like really struggled with imposter syndrome, like any realm or like I almost said space, but I hate when people say like that space.
This space.
Yeah, but like any
I'm making space for you.
Yeah, that I'm in, like always feeling like I'm the one that is like just the golden retriever that's like trying to fit in, I guess, if that makes sense. And you said something, I don't even know if you'll remember it, but it was on the Adam McKay episode, I think, where we were writing about certain things and about liberals specifically. And one of the things is I think when you were reading over my outlines, my notes, you could kind of tell that I was hedging and qualifying a lot of my opinions. And you said something to the effect of, like, this is our podcast and these get to be our thoughts, so who cares what they think? And that was weirdly, like, helpful to me because that is the thing that I tell myself all the time, but it, like, sometimes is really hard to convince yourself of it. But when someone else says it, it just helps a lot. So I feel like I've had my guard down a lot less since then. So thanks.
I'm glad to hear that. I think something that kind of came up when we were talking about it is like that, you know, that's not to say that people may not criticize or that there aren't like meaningful critiques to respond to, but like you don't have to start out on the back foot.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like we can stake a claim, and if someone wants to have a discussion, then a discussion can be had.
Yeah.
But
I think the internet also like makes my imposter syndrome worse because the idea that like an anonymous face can just be like, you fucking suck with nothing else, it's like, god damn, I must like you know what I mean, like that the idea of the
and I think that's also, I do think like Twitter has affected not exclusively Twitter, but I'm using that as a synecdoche, like has affected rhetorical strategy because there are so many forms of critique that can come up anonymously that it's hard not to start like every counterfactual, every possible counter argument that arrives, like start deflecting it immediately. But I do think, and I think we have generally done that across the podcast, which I'm happy with, is like, if we feel or believe something, just say it. And then we can like dive in or qualify or, and I think, you know, or retract and reimagine from there.
And I think like it helped me to the idea that like, I don't know, there was a time in my life when I was like writing, I wrote some like film criticism or something where I felt like I need to be the scholar or the like person that I need to be the most knowledgeable on the subject. And I think that also helped me realize like, no, that's not necessarily the most important part. Like on a podcast where you're discussing movies, it's just like open discussion. And like, I think learning things is more important than like presenting that knowledge that you have, if that makes any sense.
And we can also like speak to our respective strengths, right? I mean, like I have some background where like I thought I was headed in the direction of becoming a sociology professor on social movements, and though I took a pretty sharp left from there, I have read a lot and know a lot about those things. I have like the Model UN background, which has exposed me to different things. But there are some things that I simply am not and will never be. And even those things don't make me an expert. It just gives me a few things maybe I have to Google, a few fewer things that I have to Google, right? So I think it's great that we can play to our respective strengths and harmonize them together.
Oh yeah.
How about our next hate to give it to him, but you gotta give it to him award for best moment in a conservative film we watched?
So we did outline this, like what we were going to talk about, and I did not look at yours before I wrote mine, and then I looked at yours, and we both put, so I think we could start with this, is the hilarious like balloon fight sequence in Run, Hide, Fight, which I think is very like indicative of that movie, to be like, this we do not know how to shoot an action sequence, so let's muddy this up as much as possible, and try to find the tension in the mud of it, which just comes out as people trapped in a room with balloons full of guns, and it is really funny in a movie about school shootings.
Firing guns in a room full of balloons.
Damn.
It's also, I think the thing, I enjoyed watching that, but I also really enjoyed when I read some stuff about the movie, the making of the movie, that it was a huge pain in the ass for them to shoot because they couldn't figure out how to shoot it, and they kept spending hours blowing up balloons.
I think I also like begrudgingly like it because I feel like that's some shit I would do too.
Yes.
If I was like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to make a movie. Like, put a bunch of balloons in there, and then I'm realizing like this is a bad idea too because this is just annoying.
So I loved that because it was a kind of a genuine moment of mirth in a movie that otherwise was like upsetting and awful. And the knowing that they like tortured themselves on the set to make it happen.
Yeah, take that, Elephant by Gus Van Sant.
Yes, God.
Couldn't think of any other movies about school shootings.
The other thing that we
need
both...
to talk about Kevin. You need a balloon scene.
I mean, Tilda? You know, if Tilda's there, I'm open to it.
That would have made Run, Hide, Fight better.
Yeah, I think fucking Tilda Swinton. Tilda Swinton plays every character.
The girl.
Both of the girls.
My daddy taught me how to shoot a deer.
And she's the dad, you know. Then we each mention something else that relates to Clint Eastwood, but it's different things. Why don't you go first? What was your Clint
I
Eastwood
just
moment?
liked tracking, and I'm sure if I've watched more of Clint Eastwood's movies, especially later career, there'd be more examples of this, but like tracking like how much Clint Eastwood resents his children by the shitty roles he gives them in his movies. Specifically, like his daughter plays like one of his like one of the pains in the asses in The Mule, like one of his family members that's like, get it together, Dad, and it's just kind of being like a stickler to him. Like, he is a shitty dad, but like clearly like that was kind of a thankless role to just be like that. But my favorite one is Scott, the one who was like, of all of his kids, the one that I think was the most trying to be like a movie star.
And has, I mean,
has
had. I mean, I wouldn't call him a movie star, but has had other roles. Yeah.
But his role in
Gran
Torino, where he's just like a completely thankless, just a dude that's standing there that Clint Eastwood just gets to be like, what are you doing, you shithead? And that's his entire contribution to the movie, which I just think is really funny to like stick your kids in the movie and then also give them roles where you're like, I hate you and you hate me, and this is just how it is. And I think
that's the cost of being a Nepo baby.
Right. I'll let you do it, but I'm gonna make fun of you.
You're gonna pay.
I also watched a movie.
You think you're lucky.
One time with where Scott was the lead, and it's one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life. I had to review it for when I actually wrote for Battleship Retention, and I can't remember. Oh, I do remember what it's called. It's called Dawn Patrol.
Dawn Patrol? That seriously sounds like it was written by AI, like the title.
It's really bad. I just want to read the description of it. A surfer turned Marine held at gunpoint at a distant desert tells his tragic story of revenge gone wrong. It's really bad. But what about you? What's your gotta give it to him, Clint Eastwood? Oh, I think I already know.
Thank you, Dykes.
Yeah, hell yeah. It was a revelation.
What a moment. Thank you, Mr. Eastwood, for producing nothing else of value. No, I'm kidding. In your career except for that moment. God bless.
When he dies, I hope they play that clip of the Oscars in memoriam.
Thank you, Dykes.
Just sad music, no dialogue as they show all the other dead people.
With a winky. He's winking or it's just his eye won't open. We're not sure.
Thank you, Dykes. Yeah. Well, yeah. Uh-oh.
So the last first anniversary pod celebration prompt.
Yeah.
What is a dream that you have for the future of the pod?
I mean, other than just to like keep doing it, I like the idea of like building a canon of movies that we think are important for us. Like you mentioned before, like this is a good like kind of academic outlet for both of us that we kind of like digging into. But I've also like, I think I've talked to you in private a little bit about maybe doing other things like written criticism and video essays and things like that don't necessarily of the pod, but I think would expand on some of the ideas that we've had and whatnot. But what about you?
Like it. I dig it. I have a dream of doing like an extended, I will not call it a mini series because it would not be mini, but of doing like an extended series focused exclusively on like mythologizing the American South.
Oh yeah, that'd be fun.
And really digging into like across since the origins of cinema.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Going really hard in and talking about the ways in which American cinema has conceived of the South, its politics, its role in politics writ large across the country, and conceptions of race and gender, property and capitalism. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Well, are we ready to dig into the movie proper?
Yeah, let's go. So,
hell yeah.
We're covering Bone Tomahawk today. In our 10th episode, which was about the Daily Wire's Terror on the Prairie, a movie mostly shocking in how boring it is. And so I'm not shocked if you don't recall.
They only had one location. They had to make the most of it.
It was the prairie, and it was terrorizing.
It was a shack on a prairie.
But in the lead up in that episode, we talked about the Western genre and its role in mythologizing the American West. Obviously, I like talking about mythologizing spaces in the United States. We don't need to retread that whole introduction, but before we dive into Bone Tomahawk, it's worth explicitly tying together the title of this next cycle, The Conservative Fantasies of S. Craig Zahler, and reiterating the ideological functions of this very specific kind of storytelling. Namely, whose story is being told? What stories do we tell about the frontier? And what kind of actions do those stories try to justify?
Yeah, and I do want to take just a quick moment to kind of talk about Westerns as a genre too, and the idea of traditional Westerns versus revisionist Westerns, because the traditional Westerns are not typically movies that we see that much anymore, but Westerns can typically be separated into these two broad categories, traditional and revisionist. Traditional Westerns are usually characterized in ways that glorify the white man's forays into the American West. These films usually draw a stark line between good and evil, white hats versus black, characterized by strong, stoic male protagonists who embody justice and chivalry, who are faced to confront an encroaching evil, be it bandits or native savages. These are films like Fred Zinnemann's High Noon, John Ford's The Searchers, and Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo. However, around the 1960s, a shift took place in the cinematic Western. The shift was largely due to the end of the Hays Code, Hollywood's puritanical standards that policed depictions of sex and violence and discouraged any depictions of moral gray areas, right? If you're evil, you gotta die at the end. Good is good, evil is evil. The 1960s brought a new crop of Westerns where the protagonists weren't white hats, but instead more morally complex characters like Clint Eastwood as the Man with No Name or Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch. Furthermore, these new type of Westerns were more apt to depict the American West as it actually was. Instead of a romanticized version of Manifest Destiny, these revisionist Westerns saw the inversion of Western tropes. And a major way that revisionist Westerns changed was in the depiction of Native Americans. Instead of always portraying Native groups as brutes and savages, nuance was introduced, and the stark divide between white hats and black was slowly blurred to better reflect the reality of the American West. Bone Tomahawk, though it was made nearly 50 years after the end of the Hays Code, eschews most of the ideas of revisionist Westerns and aligns more with the traditional Westerns, where good is good and evil is evil. And while director S. Craig Zahler's horror Western is taut, thrilling, and gory as shit, it also presents kind of troubling throwbacks to those older Westerns where native tribes are barely human. So yeah, I think it'll be an interesting way to kind of look at it, and I think an interesting conversation, because this is a movie that I do like more than I dislike, I would say, even though it is pretty fucked up in its depiction of Native Americans and has a pretty lazy way of trying to get around that depiction, I feel like. But yeah, what are your initial thoughts? I suspect that I probably like this a bit more than you do, but what are your initial thoughts on the movie?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is very explicit and not sublimated literally at all that he hates indigenous people.
Yeah.
And the way, I wouldn't even say barely human. I would say he is, like, specifically has constructed, they are not human.
Yeah.
And that is upsetting and makes the gore, which is usually something that I guess, like, whatever, this is making me sound like a sicko, but usually, like, seek out in film, made it, like, much harder
to watch.
Yeah.
Agreed.
But I do think, I guess, if I'm throwing any praise into the air, I do think there are some solid performances, and there are some shots that I really liked in the movie. It's not throwaway in the sense that there's no care given to the filmic technique.
I think that's what makes S. Craig Zahler interesting, is because he is a guy that, like, has form and style and has clearly, like, studied cinema and can make a good looking movie, like writes pretty snappy, fun dialogue in certain parts, but just has kind of these overarching ideas that
plucked directly from 1960 is what it feels.
Yeah. That's why I like definitely wanted to make that stark between the traditional Western and the revisionist, which is I feel like you don't see this level of like demonizing native tribes in film to this degree in like recent years.
I feel like the overall, and I'm not saying what I'm about to say, I'm not saying this is good. I'm just speaking to like a shift historically. I think that overall the orientation has been not to depict, right, has been like evasion and lack of engagement. And this is just like so raw denial of humanity of
let's kind
of native people.
Talk about what the natives are in this movie. And actually, I want to do something slightly different, and I want to play our Armand White game a little bit early.
Okay.
Because I do think it is worth kind of really digging into like the depictions of the Native Americans, and more specifically like how I feel like S. Craig Zahler was almost predicting this kind of response and trying to kind of retrofit some dialogue to like
for sure. I mean,
not get criticized.
There is one character who is identified as a native man who is called Professor, who is obviously imbued with intelligence, and he himself, some of the dialogue denigrating this specific functionally non-human tribe are put into his mouth to speak.
For sure. It reminds me of like old racist movies where like the black character will be like, oh, I'm not that type of black person or whatever, which is
I think I've said this before on the pod, but in sociology that of like symbolic interactionism, they call this defensive othering. But it's like defensive othering instead of it being motivated by because when someone does that in real life, it's motivated by an attempt to protect yourself, right, to align yourself with the people in power. But when it's crafted seemingly without this intention, without occupying the perspective of the person saying it, it's done to launder or to whitewash that dialogue or those intentions, like such that literally a white ideology is coming out of the mouth of someone who's not white.
So the overall, if you've not seen the movie, the kind of overall premise, it's not, this is not a terribly like dense movie as far as plot goes, but a small western town is in the middle of the night is I was gonna say ransacked, but that's not quite right. A tribe of natives sneak into the town and kidnap the wife of one of the main characters, played by Patrick Wilson, and the rest of the movie is them assembling a posse to hunt down this group of natives that have been described as like something else by this other native character. And essentially what that something else is they call them troglodytes, and they're trying to
which is
that's also dicey. Like, hey, they're not natives, they're troglodytes. And that they're literally not human because they have evolved into some other kind of humanoid that has like extra bones in their throat to give them like a way to communicate through like roars. And
see, I don't interpret that as the troglodyte comment specifically makes me think that they're implying that they're less evolved and that what's in their throat is something they've inserted. It's not native to them, or it's not growth, because it's like external and pokes inside, like it's another form of cruelty that they inflict. It's just on themselves as opposed to external is how I interpret that.
But I think it doesn't work at all as painting them as not natives, because for all intents and purposes every other like signifier of what a native is in American Western, they like are that. So it's kind of like it does strike me as someone read this and be like, dude, they're gonna give you a lot of shit for like calling natives like cannibalistic savages, and he's like, all right, well they're just less evolved then, they're just troglodytes. That wash my hands of that.
Right. This movie would be more effective if all the men all these manly men from the city of Bright Hope or whatever it's called, if they were cannibals because they got trapped.
Yeah, if there was some sort of inversion of, I think that's partly.
Well, it'd also be more realistic. Like, who are the people that are more likely to eat humans? Like the folks that are unable to navigate the terrain.
Right. Yeah. Not the like extremely competent
who've been there.
Like, yeah, like cave dwellers who know the land like the back of their hand. But I do want to do the Armin White segment early because I want to read what he says about it. But do you think that Armin White liked Bone Tomahawk?
I think that there's the possibility that he could, because I think Armin White does like the history of film, and I think there are ways in which this movie is replicating, sometimes effectively, sometimes aping, those tropes from classic westerns. I feel like the fact that there is like the gore, and also maybe there are tits in this movie. Briefly, but there are tits.
Are there?
Yes, at the beginning when Arthur and Miss Dwyer are fucking.
Oh yeah.
That maybe that might be too crude for his. Yeah.
So he does not like Bone Tomahawk. He did not review it, but he did review, because this is anytime he didn't review a movie, you can always find it. Like he uses that. But anytime he didn't review it, but I still want to talk about it, it's because he shit on another movie by comparing it to this one.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was. It's a movie I never saw, but it was that Christian Bale movie from a few years ago called Hostels.
No, I have not seen that.
Which he is mad at because it is too PC. He says. In his words, but which is interesting because what he says about Bone Tomahawk in that review is Hostels follows S. Craig Zahler's Bone Tomahawk, an indie anti-western that used troglodyte ghouls as PC replacements for hostile Native Americans, which I think is kind of dead on, in that like he is trying to make a PC version to not be criticized for depicting natives in that way. I don't know if I necessarily agree that like the PC of it, but I do think what Armin is saying is kind of what I agree with, and that I do feel like the troglodyte thing of it was kind of pasted over top as a way to combat any. Hey, this is kind of racist, right?
I don't know, because I don't know that he cares.
Armin, you mean? Or
no, Zahler. Like, why the fuck would he give a shit?
But that's what I mean. I feel like it was a studio note later. Like, you need to put in some dialogue, because effectively, if you take out that scene with Zane McLaren, the native actor, they are just natives. Like there's nothing, no one ever says otherwise at any other point. They're just a native tribe that not people. So that like that whole scene with Zane McLaren feels so like someone watched it and be like, motherfucker, you got to put something in there that like you got to at least give us like, something to work with when they call you racist.
You have to be like so demented to think that excuses any of this, when really it just comes off as you so do not think native people are humans,
right?
That it's so easy to interpret interpret them.
I agree with
like
you that he didn't think about it
savages
at all, and then that like excuse of the like troglodyte thing was kind of laid over on top as a defense mechanism. Yeah. But I do want to read what else he said, because I thought this was funny in Armin White's review. He says that this Hostels and Bone Tomahawk is an example of a genre degraded by a modern Hollywood that either doesn't know or misinterprets the complexities of the great Western movies, which again, I agree with. But then he says, Bone Tomahawk's fanboy cult regards it with the same silly ahistorical hipness as they do Tarantino's Western debauch, The Hateful Eight. Those are not the same. That is a crazy comparison to me.
The Hateful Eight is the only, I don't know if I've ever said this on the pod before. I've definitely talked about how Tarantino is
you don't like
part
it.
of my.
Yeah.
I have never seen it because, the trailers came up for it. I'm like, okay, bro, we're continuing to make Western movies. What are we doing?
Yeah.
Sure. Then it came out, it dropped on Netflix or Mac, HBO at that point in time, whatever, a year and a half later. And in the first like 3 minutes, Samuel L. Jackson just like
punches a woman in the face.
Jennifer Jason Leigh repeatedly, and I turned it off, and I've never revisited it. So
I do like The Hateful Eight. It's on my bottom half of like Tarantino's movies, but
also that I've watched I view movies that include violence against women. It was like that we are out the gate. There's no like establishment of what we're doing here beyond a woman is getting smacked in the face repeatedly. That I was like, I'm good. Thank you
and it's
so
played,
much.
It is definitely played for laughs in The Hateful Eight. Like, it is supposed to be funny that he just straight up... Because I think she's also handcuffed. So he just, like, punches her straight in the face.
On, They're walking like through the snow.
Yeah. Oh, I think they're in the.
I thought they're walking with one of the carts, like one of the wagons.
I think I'm trying to remember because I feel like he first punches her when they're in the wagon discussing the Lincoln letter.
Maybe it's I think I checked and it was like I had not watched more than 8 minutes of the movie and I was like, we're good.
It's also too long, but like there is shit that I do like about it. Like it has an amazing score because what's his nuts came out of retirement because Tarantino's such a fanboy.
Marconi.
Yes.
Like who did
all the like spaghetti western stuff and the Man with No Name movies.
Inglourious Bastards too.
Yeah, he won his first Academy Award for Hateful Eight. Good God, we said it a million times and I couldn't. I
was like, are you talking about another movie? No,
but yeah, the comparison between Bone Tomahawk and Hateful Eight as both being the same kind of ahistorical hipness, I thought was ridiculous because I don't think Bone Tomahawk is necessarily trying to be hip in the way that like a Tarantino movie is.
Well, it doesn't. I think it's like Tarantino's involved in this like postmodern,
right?
Like scrambling and simulacrum and layering that I don't think this movie is doing. I think Zahler was like, I'm going to make a Western.
Yes, he wanted to.
And it's still in conversation with and referring to, but it's not like put in a blender in the way that Tarantino does.
Zahler works really well within like strict genre conventions. He's not going to invert those genre conventions clearly. And I think when we get to the next two movies too, we'll see that.
Here's the thing is because like I think that so much of and I say this both from like watching it and loving most of his movies and also like having read his book and read interviews with him over fucking 20 years or whatever, is that so much of like Tarantino's sensibilities comes from like being raised on exploitation movies as a child, like being taken to exploitation. And that's why I'm really curious how I'll feel kind of at the end after we have watched the other Zahlers, because based on this, I would not say that he's playing in that key. But if you're talking about making a movie about prisons, or I don't know exactly what Dragged on Concrete or By Concrete,
Hard-boiled detective,
but like hard-boiled, those are things that like could play in an exploitation key, that I'm curious to see what those look like, because I think that's a key difference here, is that he does not seem to be. He's not like funneling Western tropes through the exploitation kaleidoscope.
Yeah.
You know, in the way that like Tarantino is.
Yeah. And before we leave Armand, I do want to give a little teaser for a future episode and show you this very cursed tweet that I found when I was trying to find his reviews.
Lord.
It's a tweet by Armand White saying about Dragged Across Concrete. Got to plug S. Craig Zahler's Dragged Across Concrete. Best film of the year when talking Oscars with Tucker Carlson. So apparently Armand White went on Tucker Carlson to discuss the Oscars, which I am going to watch that. I'm going to watch the shit out of that.
Yeah, please send me that video. Let's watch that to prepare for Dragged Across Concrete.
Yeah, when we do that movie, we're definitely going to talk about it. 'Cause I want to know what Tucker had to say about Dragged Across Concrete. Hey, he was black. He had to do that to him. He was a black guy. I mean, Mel Gibson had to drag him across the concrete.
I like that your Tucker Carlson voice is like fucking Mickey Mouse.
It is, kind of. But yeah, the good Lord. But yeah, so let's dive more into the movie. Actually, before we get into like the plot of it, I do want to like non-ironically give praise to one thing that I think is just great across the board in this movie, which is all of the performances. Not necessarily what they're saying, because some of that is fucked up, but I think everybody in this movie is great, and there's like some character actors in this movie that I goddamn love every time they pop up, even beyond the four. So the four like dudes who are gonna ride off into the unknown to rescue the damsel in distress are Kurt Russell, who plays the sheriff of this small town, and his like second in command, Deputy Chicory, played by Richard Jenkins, who's the best in this movie.
I love Chicory's character.
Yeah, he is so good.
There's something I really love about that archetype of someone who is like very insightful and
dumb.
But dumb only in, you know, if there's like 15 arenas in which like intelligence functions, it's like only the most like superficial contact level is he dumb. Like on every other level he is like insightful and in touch and attuned. And I really liked his character was like the thing that kept me watching the movie,
really good.
Frankly.
Do you have a favorite line that he said? Because I remember mine instantly. I looked it up to make sure I say it right, but
I would have to look through my notes. I am not someone that just like remembers lines.
I'm not too well either, but he has
that.
so many good ones that like.
But he does. He does have many delightful lines. I do love that. Like we're initially introduced to him, and he's like, I was on a night ramble." You're like, what?
Yeah.
What is that? But he has those beautiful little bon mots. Oh, something I wrote down that he said, "I know the world's supposed to be round, but I'm not so sure this part."
Yeah.
When they're wandering out on a plane. I thought that was lovely.
My favorite is when they're like, it's the morning or the night before they're gonna go out and do this dangerous mission, and he walks in to where Kurt Russell is, and he goes, "Ooh, that's some gruesome tea." And Kurt Russell goes, "Oh, it's not tea, it's soup." And he goes, "Oh, do you think I can have some?" And then he says, "I thought you didn't like the smell of it." And he goes, "I didn't like the smell when I thought it was tea."
When I thought it was tea.
So good. Yeah, he's great in that. But yeah, and also Fred Melamed, who is a character actor that I really like, is in this. Are you a Fred Melamed head?
He's the bartender, right?
Yeah. He just pops up in like a million different things. The thing that I really like him in is he plays Maria Bamford's therapist. And did you ever watch Lady Dynamite? Maria Bamford's show? Yeah, he's like her therapist who just is completely like always at the end of his rope and doesn't know what the fuck to do with her. And he's really funny on that. But yeah, the performance. Oh, and David Arquette and fucking Sid Haig at the beginning.
I once the bartender, he had some good lines as well.
Yeah.
One I had written down is when they first walk into the bar, he says, "Do you want something potent or omnipotent?" And I was like, ooh, I wish a bartender would pose that inquiry to me, because I'd be very curious to see what they offer.
Yeah, what the omnipotent option. But yeah. So another thing that I want to do as we go through Zahler's filmography here, because he has only written 3 movies, he has only directed 3 movies, though he has written several others. There was an interesting one too that he wrote one of the like sequel. He wrote Puppet Master, The Littlest Reich.
Yes.
Which is crazy. I've seen that. It is terrible. I watched it because I believe Barbara Crampton is in that one, and I'm a big Barbara Crampton fan.
There's a lot of people in it, because I remember when it came out in 2017 or 2018, because I listen to a lot of like comedy podcasts, right? So there were just people like circulating through, like I want to say like Thomas Lennon.
Yeah, Thomas Lennon
is
Charlene
in it.
McGee, Udo Kier. Yeah, it's a crazy cast, and the movie's terrible. But he apparently wrote that. But he's only directed 3 movies, and I think the overarching theme in these 3 movies are going to be the ways in which S. Craig Zahler depicts masculinity and like clearly what being masculine is to him. And I think they mostly all revolve around like stoicism and capability of violence is like your 2 main ingredients to make a Zahler manly man. So, what were your impressions on his ideas of masculinity in this movie?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Stoicism, potentiality for violence, willingness to engage in self-sacrifice, I would say is an element. And then also, of course, relationship to women,
or
specifically white women. In terms of a sense of protectionism, and I think there's like a real idea running through this of like commitment to promises, that like your word is your bond. Now you may violate other people's like human rights, but if you say you're going to do something, damn, you better do it. And then also, of course, the just by nature of contrast and juxtaposition, a full sense of humanity relative to indigenous people that's based on all of those things. Which is to say that being a man is not only achieving those benchmarks, but also necessarily means not being an indigenous person.
Yeah. And also the way the non-manly men are treated in the movie, specifically the mayor character, who has like one scene, but he's kind of like a dandy fop who does not embody any of the traditional masculine stereotypes.
Whose wife speaks for him.
And literally they won't talk to him, they'll ask his wife. So it's clear, like, to me it's clearly like S. Craig Zahler's like, there's two kind of men, one that'll get shit done and one that'll wear a bow tie and a top hat and
stand behind a woman.
Yeah. But first I would say that the most manly man in this movie, according to S. Craig Zahler, would be, I think his ideal masculine figure would be the Kurt Russell character, the kind of like obvious alpha and Zahler's primary avatar for what a man should be. He's stoic and wise. He chooses his words carefully, never betrays any kind of emotion as feelings just get in the way. He's the ultimate embodiment of traditional Western sense of justice and morality. I think the like prime example that would come to me is if you've ever seen, did you ever see High Noon? That's kind of, I know you don't like Westerns, but that's kind of like the prime example of a dude who has to kind of grit his teeth, bear it, and take the shit that's coming down the pike. It's like High Noon is basically Gary Cooper is the sheriff of a small town that like bandits are coming to raid, and there's no ifs, ands, or but about it. Like, and he is the single line of defense and has to kind of like, all right, well, I'm gonna die with my boots on, kind of type thing. But yeah, do you get the idea that Kurt Russell might be his like ideal masculine form if we're looking at his manly men of this?
I think so, particularly because the conclusion of the movie seems to depend, not like necessarily, but is constructed to depend on his final sacrifice, and that like his commitment to other people, to his existing obligations, is more important than his commitment to his wife, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I would say the number 2 in the manly men rankings in this, which to me is the most interesting character that he kind of doesn't do a lot with, is Brooder, played by Matthew Fox, who's this like vaguely deranged in ways that like are slightly articulated but more hinted to, but very efficient at killing. His personal foibles and questionable morals don't matter as much as his ability to think quickly and violently. And he's a character who's revealed to be kind of a monster, but he's ultimately redeemed because of his proficiency in violence, like because of his ability to like think quickly, be like, I'm gonna fuck you up, I don't care if I die in the process. Like, I think in Zahler's mind, that kind of redeems, that is the redemption that character needed. Like, he clearly is writing this character with a redemption arc, although the redemption arc is kind of like falls flat, I think, to a more compassionate thinking person.
I think he is valued, or his value comes from his ability to be strategic. And that I think it's not just like redemption, though of course at the end there is kind of this attempted redemption moment, which fails because he doesn't he basically he is left with a bunch of dynamite. He asks to be left with a bunch of dynamite after he's been shot, with the intention that he will kill a bunch of the men of this tribe, but we see that doesn't actually happen. So I think I think more so throughout the movie, it's like his value comes from his ability to be strategic, and his like murderousness is just like a side effect of that. Like, it's not, I don't think that there's like any attempt to apologize for it. It's like, well, we need the plus, so the minus is, comes along with it. Basically.
And there's Chicory, the Richard Jenkins character, who is kind of the second in command, the natural bravo of the group, which is a really funny phrase that I do want to take a detour on this because it is really funny.
Yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Do you know who Owen
here,
Benjamin is?
Yes.
Comedian that took a hard right turn into Nazism when comedy wasn't working out.
Yes.
And when all the news broke about Steven Crowder being like kind of an asshole to work with, Owen Benjamin tweeted out this long thing because he used to work for Steven Crowder, and he tweeted out this long thing about how Steven Crowder would always make him wear dresses for skits. And that made him uncomfortable. And in his tweet, he wrote like, "Now I am a bit of a natural Bravo, so when Steven Crowder told me to put the dress on, I put the dress on," which I thought was just a really funny thing to. I'm a natural Bravo.
Oh, like instead of an alpha.
Yes, yeah, and not beta, because beta has different connotations. So he had to come up with a different
he had to
military
use the military
yeah.
alphabet.
It's funny for a number of reasons.
And he was like in the tank on that too. Like he thought about that. He had to because he was like, I can't use beta.
Beta's the one I would use, but that's already been co-opted to mean like the mayor from this movie. But yeah, he is not your typical version of masculinity, except the fact that he is redeemed because he recognizes the alpha as the alpha. And loyalty, I think, would be his masculine trait that I think S. Craig Zahler probably idolizes there.
I think loyalty, but also there's something about it that's like indomitable spirit. Like he is like, it's really hard to hold someone down who is meandering.
Yeah.
You know, so I think there's something,
which is why he's like the most interesting in this movie.
Yeah,
I feel like. Yeah,
because he's not. I mean, he has a sense of loyalty, but his mind is not like trapped.
Yeah.
In the way that the other men are.
Yeah, and then to me, maybe not. I don't find him to be that interesting of a character, but I do find him interesting if we're looking at the way S. Craig Zahler depicts masculinity. Is the Patrick Wilson character?
I think he's very interesting from the perspective of masculinity.
His character himself is like kind of boring. He's the guy whose wife gets kidnapped and he wants to go find her. But the way he's presented early on in the movie is like more on the like dandy fop side. He doesn't do any rough
cowboy.
Yeah, but like he breaks his leg doing something like kind of like rudimentary, like he's fixing the roof or something.
The roof during a storm. I don't think he's intended to be a fop at all.
Oh, I feel like there's a few.
I think it's just like he is. Why I think he's an interesting character to inspect from the perspective of masculinity, and whatever Zahler is doing is he's a perfect example of how masculinity fucks you up.
True, yeah.
Because like he is a cowboy who is gone all the time, and then he comes home and is trying to fix the roof during a storm and fucking compound fractures his goddamn leg. Yeah. And his wife's like, "Finally, you're here. I'm so excited. We can fuck now." And he's like, "Well, but I want to be like rough and tumble. I want to be back out there. I'm being constrained here in the private sphere of the home. I got to be out in public." And then once she gets kidnapped, he's like, "Oh no, now I must save her," but he has total inability to save her because of all of the other masculinity injuries he already has.
Right, yeah. I guess what I was riffing on more was like the idea that he, like, the violence has to be learned. Like, he's the one that has to kind of learn violence throughout the movie to like ultimately redeem himself and become the hero of the movie. Whereas, because
I just think it's that he's handicapped. I
do love when a movie where like someone has a fucked up injury that's just getting like more like progressively more disgusting as the movie goes on.
Also, I will say that scene where he like the cleverness that I think that's the thing is he has to turn to being clever because his ability to be conventionally strong has been limited. And so like the scene where he's laying back taking a rest while he's literally dragging himself through the desert, y'all. Literally on his hands, because
he re-breaks it basically.
His leg is fucked up.
Yeah.
And he's laying facing in the opposite direction and puts his hat like basically on his foot. And so as the native people approach, they shoot an arrow through his hat, but then he's able to turn
around and do a quick
And I thought that would not him shooting native people, but like that, he's having to become more strategic because he can't just have like the brute force since his damn leg's broken.
I do have a question. Do you like Patrick Wilson?
I do. Yeah.
I vacillate between being like, well, he was terrible in that and he was good in that.
He has kind of like a wimpy man vibe, and some of this is definitely just coming from like Watchmen. I love Watchmen. He very much like is inextricably tied to Night Owl and Dan Drayberg for me, but I think he just kind of plays all of like his horror stuff.
I hate him in all those
is in that vein.
Insidious movies.
I'm like not a huge fan of that series in general.
No,
the single scariest image ever in my life.
I know mine
is from those movies.
Can we Is it from The Conjuring 1?
Yeah, of like the demon behind him. That's like behind him.
Oh, that's Insidious.
Okay.
When he like slightly moves his head and the demon is right behind him. Yeah,
Yes.
it is really scary. Yeah, those movies have like the capability to produce really like scary images in movies that I don't really like all that much.
Yes, I don't think the movies are good or well done, but they have like people in production design and like in their art direction and all of that is like their costume design is doing work.
Yeah,
because like The Nun is freaky as fuck.
I fell asleep. We just were watching
like
it,
The Nun itself.
Yeah.
But like the movie is like,
which I like that lady that played that.
Yeah,
that's
Bonnie,
the trash monster from Mulholland Drive.
Yeah.
So I was but she's
fucking suing them because they like made a bunch of action figures and stuff of her likeness from The Nun, and she did not get like the money that she was supposed to from her contract.
Yeah, and that is a face that you can't say was coincidental because she has a very
it's a very specific look.
Yeah. I want to say my favorite part of the Conjuring movies, the movies that I don't like, but the scariest part is in The Conjuring 1, the original, is when somebody is putting up laundry on the line outside and like the sheet blows away. And for like 0.2 seconds, it clings on to a form that's standing right next to them. And that was scary as shit. Yeah. I find him really annoying in all those movies. And then I find him to be like a kind of the weak spots in movies that I do like sometimes, like Little Children.
Really? You don't think he's good? You don't think
I think he's okay, but like I don't think he's holding his own next to what's her face and what's his face. I can't remember anybody's name. Kate Winslet and Jackie Earle Haley.
What's his face and what's her face. Also, I mean, I think he's very good at playing men that have been. Some piece of them has been cut out.
Yeah.
And it varies, like
because he looks like the all-American dude, and then always plays guys
like
that have
withered really well. So I like him.
I want to find one that I do like him in, so that I don't have to shit on him constantly.
I thought he was good in this. I liked his. I mean, I'm not saying I like his character in that. Like, I want to hang out with that guy, but I do think it was interesting to have someone who is functionally handicapped by their masculinity, who is like, I'm gonna keep fighting, and really, like, I think he's intended, obviously, to be the protagonist because they're successful.
Yes, I think he is the protagonist, which I think is a slight mistake with this movie. Is I think sometimes it feels more like Kurt Russell's movie. Like they try to give him, because it's fucking Kurt Russell, and I feel like there's times where like it tries to give him, like, pass the ball to him, and I feel like it loses focus a little bit on like what the main story is and like who is the driving force of the movie, which would be him and his wife, obviously. And I do feel like sometimes the movie itself is like battling with who is the protagonist of this movie and doesn't quite realize that it is him, and Kurt Russell is a side character. He is 100% a supporting character in the story of this movie or whatever, even if he does have more screen time. But yeah, so let's talk about some more of the little troubling aspects of this movie, and I want to start with Matthew Fox killing two Mexican dudes and being pretty the movie itself being fairly nonchalant about that. I don't know. What did you think of that? Well, let me set up what happened. So they're camped out on their quest to find his wife, and they're approached by two guys who seem like just fellow travelers, wanderers. And the idea is, do we trust them? Do we not? And kind of almost without really doing any sort of vetting, Matthew Fox just shoots and kills both of them. To which I thought the only fucked up line that Richard Jenkins has that I was like, man, I wish he didn't say that because I like Richard Jenkins so much, is that it seems like S. Craig Zahler tries to make a joke in that moment where Richard Jenkins goes, well, Bruder just taught those two Mexicans about manifest destiny. Well, and on
some level, like, it's true, right? That's what manifest destiny is white men fucking killing brown men.
And I think it's the tone that it is not,
for sure.
It is not meant to be like,
I'm not saying Zahler is being self-reflexive about it, but it is a moment of like revelation. It's a mask off moment.
It is. It's just he is not coming from it.
Well, and I think especially because the way that the movie plays out, he's like quote unquote justified by like subsequent turns of action. So it's like the whole reason why Broder kills these two men and sets up these like bells so that they go off around them is because he says they send out a scouting party, meaning they very clearly meaning not white men who represent a threat to them and their mission, right? So he kills these two dudes without hesitating. And then, you know, says basically like, that's a scouting party. Like, I know that it seems to you like they might be random travelers or just other people who happen to stumble upon us. But even though, you know, one of them wasn't armed, like they are a scouting party. And then immediately at their next campsite, they are getting accosted by people. So I think that it's intending to, the film is justifying his actions.
Yeah, for sure. You know? Yeah. And he's given, like, even though it doesn't work, he's given kind of a hero's death that, like, he is going to sacrifice himself for, like, the cause or whatever. And I don't know, like, I feel like that character didn't earn that. There should have been more, like, reflection on that guy. Like, that would have been a more, to me, that character is interesting because he does exist in a moral gray area. And I would have preferred to see, I don't know, a little bit more with that rather than just be like, well, he's a killing machine, so he's good in our book.
Well, and I think here's like a key difference between someone, and again, I'm not saying this to like defend everything Tarantino's ever done, but if I think about like big movies that some of my most beloved, you know, white dude directors that make hyper-violent movies, like Tarantino or Scorsese would do in this instance is like that guy would die and it would be like pathetic.
Yeah, it would be funny. Or, I mean, not funny, but like...
Or, I mean, it would just be pathetic. I think about, like, the scene in The Departed where Jack Nicholson's character is in a car and it crashes and it's on fire and he's like, well, fuck, and he shoots himself in the head. That is a deeply bleak moment to me in the movie that I have seen 100 fucking times. But it's like, it's not even what that guy deserved necessarily, but it's just simply like violence begets violence. When this is what you do, when you go out and inflict pain and suffering, then what you have generated is an environment that can only reap you violence and suffering. And so I think it could have been something like that, you know?
He needed a White Boy Bob death from Out of Sight. Do you remember White Boy Bob's death in Out of Sight?
No, I do not. That series of words is just...
Oh, have you seen Out of Sight?
I have not. I don't know what you're talking about at all.
Oh, you should see Out of Sight. It is Steven Soderbergh, the movie that he did with George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez in the late 90s.
Oh, and Ving Rhames. I'm in.
Yeah. Oh, it's so fucking good. And it's based on Elmore Leonard books.
Oh, okay.
But can I spoil? Well, I already told you White Boy Bob dies. Can I spoil how he dies?
Sure.
He's like a henchman who's supposed to be like a big bad motherfucker that just is like, I'm going to fucking kill you. You have no chance against me. And his death is, I love an accidental death in a movie, and this is my favorite one, is that he's chasing George Clooney. Like the climax is in like a grand like estate, a house, and he's chasing George Clooney up a huge staircase with a gun in his hand and trips and shoots himself straight in the head and dies. And that's the whole, like, you think it's building to this chase, they're gonna have a like shoot off or whatever, and he just falls on the stairs and shoots himself.
Right. Or it's like the Departed, like when they walk out of the elevator and immediately get you know, it's but again, it's like people can say that it's movies like that are endorsing violence, but at the end of the day, there is a clear thread between what you inflict on other people, the systems of violence that you engage in, you will not be exempt from.
Whereas this,
whereas this is like, I mean, I do think that there is more of a moment of redemption, even though it doesn't, you know, the bomb doesn't go off and he doesn't have that total like heroic moment. He does get to have that kind of, I'm sorry.
I'm sacrificing myself for the
So, and he has that moment and then he dies. So he's not cognizant of his lack of fulfillment of the promise of sacrifice, you know?
S. Craig Zahler in general just reminds me of like a dude, like a conservative dude that is just always ready to like have a reason for like a legal kill. Do you know what I mean? Like, dude, like I could picture him on like Fox News as a talking head after Kyle Rittenhouse murdered those people, just like listing off every defense of him. Like that, he strikes me as that guy, like the one that's just like, well, he had it coming, and like all of his all of the deaths seem like that kind of guy that was like, well, maybe those Mexicans were gonna kill him. Yeah.
Well, it's like this paradoxical, like, desiring violence, but requiring that it exist within a legitimated structure at the same time. Like, yeah, he's this was a movie. So as you've described, right, the town has been, like, quote unquote raided, and Mrs. Dwyer, who's married to Arthur Dwyer, who is Patrick Wilson, has been kidnapped, and they're walking across, they being the men, this troop of men, are going across the plain to try and a desert to try and get Mrs. Dwyer and enter, like, this no man's land zone where this tribe lives, that
where
has
even the
kidnapped
good natives won't go or whatever.
It's very much like there is no scrap of humanity here, and that journey has all of these trials and tribulations, like we talked about, of incursions against them or people attacking them, and the elements present a problem, and Arthur re-breaks his leg, and so they leave him behind, and they're leaving clues like rocks in a row so that he knows how to find them, and then finally they reach this like burial ground that we saw very briefly at the beginning of the movie, because it's where David Arquette initially gets nabbed, and it's clear that they've made it to the place where these quote unquote troglodytes live. So what proceeds from there? They're
immediately overwhelmed and captured, basically, and that leads to kind of the piece de resistance, which feels like S. Craig Zahler had the idea for this practical effect and was like, oh, I got to build a movie around that. Because it is a good effect. Like, it is gross as shit.
So they've got them in cages, basically. In cages. Arthur is not yet with them. He's still trailing behind.
But his wife is there and still alive.
Yes, his wife is there, and Bruder is dead at this point, so it's just Chicory and the sheriff are locked in one cage.
They also discover that the other person who went missing in this was like a under deputy. What was his thing? I don't remember. He was like I don't know, the deputy's helper. I don't know what the fuck he was. But he also got kidnapped, and they find him in a cage as well, looking a bit worse for the wear. I will say that woman that plays his wife, Mrs.
Samantha,
O'Dwyer,
Samantha, she was good.
She has a great line reading that really freaked the shit out of me, which is like the second they get there, she's like, just do what they say. Do what they say. Because like clearly like she has seen what they will do.
Shit.
Yeah.
Nick is the name of the deputy that has been also in prison there, and was taken along with Samantha Dwyer and David Arquette's character, whatever his name is,
who dies off screen.
He dies off screen. Yeah.
And then we get like one of the goriest things I've seen in a movie, which is, I guess, Nick's time with our tribe has expired.
Can I read my notes
please.
here? I wrote, "They ate David Arquette!" ! All capitals. Then I said, "They stripped Nick naked, beat him, scalp him, and then turn him upside down and split him in half." Dude, what the
They
fuck?
give him the old banana split. They pull his legs apart upside down and take a crude axe made from
tomahawk.
A bone. You know what? I not even realize that is what it was, but it is definitely a bone tomahawk, and they split him in half. Now, we did mention this before, but I will say that I think Terrifier's scene does it better. First off, it's more fun in Terrifier.
Well, yes, it's clearly...
Because everything that precedes it in this movie makes it not fun.
Well, I think in Terrifier, there's also something in like a horror movie that has like elements of camp or elements of some reflexivity, where it's like, you're watching me, I'm watching you, like we're aware, there's some awareness that's acknowledged, that makes it this lead up of like, we're gonna get that like gory show moment, that big like stage.
There's showmanship to it, and it's boundary pushing for the sake of showmanship, whereas this is boundary pushing for the sake of like further dehumanizing
indigenous people who are not humans, as constructed by Zahler. Yes, it really, because I knew it was gore. I know, and again, I watch a lot of gory movies, whatever. But it really shocked me.
Yeah, because this movie is not like that consistently
it's not that gory.
But when it is, like, they get their money's worth.
And there's parts of it that I do on some level appreciate. Like, I appreciate that, like with the compound leg fracture. It's kind of rare in a movie that is not explicitly horror to depict that so viciously, right? Like to really put out there, and is what it would look like if you had a fucking compound fracture that you broke and someone had to set it with a hammer in a desert.
The hammer reset was awesome. That
it
was
would
so
look
gross.
disgusting. And so I appreciate going for that, but this really blew back my hair. I was not anticipating it. The scalping, I was like, oh, that's what's happening, and then it was like, oh no, we are going in deep. Yes, there's a whole fucking entree here.
But yeah, and that's kind of like the toward signifying the end of the movie, whereas like Patrick Wilson does eventually catch up to them. And
I wrote down a Samantha line related to this that made me laugh. Because they're, like I said, they had been putting out rocks for Arthur to theoretically find them. And Chicory and the sheriff express this to Samantha while they're locked in cages after Nick has been bisected in front of them. And she says, this is why frontier life is so hard, not because of the Indians or the elements, but because of the idiots.
Oh yeah, that is good. Because I actually thought of that too when they were putting it out. I was like, okay, I'm glad they're marking the path, but that doesn't say like which way to go. Like they literally just like line rocks, and I'm like, well, is it a left turn, or are you telling me to go right, or
straight?
Is this a keep going rock, or is this a turn now rock? I don't know.
And I will say, and this is part of why I like Patrick Wilson in this movie, is there is some fucking impressive physical acting that he is doing.
Oh yeah, he's got
he is dragging himself, he's crawling,
and he's got to sell it the whole time too.
Pratfalls. He has to, whatever he's doing, he constantly has to be selling that he has it. So I did appreciate his performance, even if whatever, I don't like the character, I'm not happy with the movie it's embedded in. I thought it was an impressive physical performance.
Yeah, I again, all the performances are good. It's just the characters are maybe a bit suspect. So in the end, we have 3 survivors. Wait, does Chicory live? Chicory lives. It's Chicory, Samantha, and Arthur who live to tell the tale of how a bunch of savages basically brutalized them to further kind of perpetualize the stereotypes of them.
And there's something that we see at the end, as they're leaving, Chicory picks up a rock to defend themselves, but they cross through the burial ground, and every other point in the movie when they cross through the burial ground, you hear this eerie sound, which we learn is we had talked about a while ago about this bone embedded in the native people's necks.
Which he then digs out of one of their necks.
Yeah, Arthur
and then
digs
uses
out. That's
whistle.
how he's able to get through. Right. Again, he has to rely on cunning and intelligence.
That was cool.
Instead
I like
of
that.
Raw,
That was pretty gross.
Brutishness to get through. But as they walk through the burial ground and we don't hear any horns, no one comes after them, then Chicory drops his rock safety has been assured. Whiteness is protected only when we violate and murder an entire tribe, because that's what is
happens
implied. I guess aside from the 2 disgusting blinded pregnant women.
Oh yeah, that was unnecessary.
That they didn't kill, but there's no one to take care of them, so they're gonna die. Yeah.
I did not like that. That was not a fun moment, which is, they reference the fact that they are a traveling kind of band of a tribe or whatever, and that they only have 2 women with them who are blind, and at the time they say blind and handicap, and then he shows us that later on, and they're literally quadruple amputees that are there for
with
breeding.
Sticks shoved in their eyes and impregnated.
Yeah, that was not a fun moment.
Yeah, and that's something that, again, I think thinking about what is his relationship to exploitation, because that is very much an exploitation, right? Be real, a midnight movie moment, but the rest of the movie doesn't really feel that way, and stylistically it's not infused with that style.
And you can do that and still be giving power to the I would say Mad Max Fury Road does a very similar thing, but it doesn't feel as disgusting as
I guess my point is in an exploitation movie, right, no one's being empowered. It was just a what's the nastiest, grossest shock that we can do to bring someone to bring audiences in late night, right? And have people remember us because of that notable moment, but the rest of the movie doesn't feel that way. Like, it's not, the dialogue
right.
isn't that way. Like, it's not that level of like graphic.
Yeah, because he's working in the Western genre. Like, he's a genre filmmaker. He's not working in exploitation until he tries it, but like it just doesn't work because he's been strictly within the confines of like a traditional Western story, and then slap the exploitation elements on top of it, which I think is what makes them land a bit oddly.
Strangely. Yeah, I think that's something I'm going to keep in mind just as we move through the rest of them, and maybe that's something for after we watch the third one, of just like how like trying to situate him vis-a-vis like exploitation influence.
I feel like they get more directly more direct homages to exploitation movies as they go on.
Okay. I'll
but with
keep an eye on it.
Not a lot of self-awareness. Again, I'm mostly thinking of Dragged Across Concrete. I do not remember Brawl in Cell Block 99 very well at all. But we're in for a lot of Vince Vaughn coming up.
I mean, I'm personally fine with that. I like Vince Vaughn.
Me too, just not in Dragged Across Concrete. No? I really don't like Dragged Across Concrete. It's not because of him. It's just because the whole movie is just...
He's in both of them?
Yeah, he's in both.
Okay.
He's the protagonist in Brawl.
I know he's in... Yeah, I know he's in Brawl because it's like his face on it, but Dragged Across Concrete...
And then he's the co-star with Mel Gibson in Dragged Across Concrete.
Rough.
So,
well,
yeah.
I look forward to it. I think for our next movie, we're going to do... Well, spoil exactly, but going to cover something related to labor unions.
Hell yeah.
You have any other thoughts on the movie?
I do not.
You want to share?
This was a fun one to like revisit something that I think I liked when I was a little bit younger and maybe a little less I guess informed in like certain like areas of like representation and how we depict minority groups and things like that. And so it was a interesting watch to still like appreciate the things that I appreciated about this movie, but also I feel like giving, not to say that when I watched it the first time it didn't dawn on me that this was kind of fucked up, but like I don't know, reckoning it more this time I think was an interesting experience for me. Yeah,
I look forward to reflecting back on this movie in the context of his other films, because this is an entirely new avenue for me. I have not seen any of his movies.
Hell yeah.
So like, subscribe, follow, etc.
Do all them things. We would love it.
Leave us reviews. Only positive ones, losers.
Yes, and we will get you on the next one.
Woo! Bye.